Christians. In Matthew 24, verse 1, we see that Jesus went out and departed from the temple. And as I explained in the previous post, his departing from the temple was a final departure. This was his farewell to the temple in Jerusalem. This was his farewell to the Jewish economy, to that whole Judaism system. All of this was gone, was going to be gone, as he predicted in verse 2 when he says, "Do you not see these things?" He's talking to his disciples. He says, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, there shall not be one stone here that is left upon another, which shall not be thrown down." He says that the temple is going to be picked apart stone by stone, and not one stone will be left upon another. Now in verse 3, it says that as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, "Tell us, when shall these things be? And by what sign, and what shall be the sign of your coming, and of the end of the world?" So here's what's happening. Disciples asked three things. In response to Christ saying that the stones of the temple were going to be thrown down, they asked, "Tell us, when shall this be?" But then they ask a second and a third question. "What shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world?" How will we know? When is going to take place? Notice they did not question what he said was going to happen. They did not question the veracity of his prediction. They did not question the prophecy that the temple was going to be thrown down and that the Levitical priesthood and the ceremonial law were going to be all destroyed with it. Now, here's one question that I have for Christians. How do the Jews today, how does Judaism today explain the fulfillment of the prediction that Jesus Christ, who we know to be the true Messiah, how do they explain what he said actually happened? How do they explain the actual happening of what he predicted? It has been over 2,000 years, and there has been no rebuilt temple according to the physical nature of one built by the hands of men. See, to me, this says a whole lot about who Christ was, because what he said happened. And keep in mind, Judaism as a religion does not embrace Christ at all. In fact, they will argue that his crucifixion, which was capital punishment, was deserved. That he did that which he was accused of doing. That he was guilty. This is what they will tell you today. They have no problem talking about this amongst themselves. I have friends that are Jewish. They'll tell me the same thing. We just disagree. But Jesus said that this was going to happen. And ever since, there's been this scuttlebutt by Jews and Christians alike to have a rebuilt temple in Jerusalem. A temple where I suppose all of these, the Levitical priesthood and the ceremonial law and all these things that pertained and that were annexed to that old system are going to be revitalized, reestablished, reaffirmed. Jesus said this was going to happen, and it did. 40 years later, it happened. And so Christ, the disciples asked Christ, "Tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of your coming and of the end of the world?" And then from verse 4 in Matthew 24, from verse 4 on down through verse 31, Christ gives an answer to these questions. He gives an answer to these questions. And his answers cover a whole spectrum of events, and he covers with detail things that are going to take place. And so we see the first of these in verse 4, where Jesus says to them initially, he says to take heed and let no man deceive you. In other words, he is saying, I'm going to tell you, and I want you to pay attention to what I'm going to tell you. And you need to pay attention, and you need to give a careful ear so that no man will deceive you. So Christ is telling his disciples, I'm going to give you a clear-cut answer. I'm going to give you an answer. And it is not going to be an answer that comes in a parabolic form. I'm going to give you a straight-up answer so that you cannot be deceived. And this is what Christ proceeded to do. So in verse 4, he says, I want you to listen to me because I don't want you to be deceived. And then in verse 5, he goes, because many men are going to come in my name, saying that I am the Christ, and they shall deceive many. But hearken back to verse 4. He says, listen to what I'm saying, what I'm about to say, because I don't want you to be deceived. And now he begins to tell you how the deception will come. Many will come in my name, saying that I am the Christ. And by this, they will deceive many. He goes on in verse 6 and he says, and you shall hear of wars. Not only are you going to hear men come in my name saying that they are the Christ and that they're going to deceive many, but don't you be deceived. He says, and you shall hear of wars, and you shall hear of rumors of wars. And he says to them, do not be troubled. Do not be troubled. For all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. Now notice, they asked the question, tell us when these things shall be. What shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? And by the way, world here is the end of the age. The end of the age. The end of that system of worship. The Levitical priesthood, the ceremonial law, the synagogue, and all the trimmings that go along with what it was built with and how it was built and what it was built for and what takes place in it and who comes in and who comes out. All of the pomp and glory of that system of worship, of that ecclesia, of that ecclesiastical organization and structure. He goes, you're going to hear about wars and rumors of wars, but don't be troubled by that. Don't let that bother you. All these things must come to pass. In other words, they are intended. These things need to happen. Christ is saying, I want these things to happen. They have a purpose. But you, I'm telling you in private, don't be rattled by it. Don't be rattled by it. And Christians, let this be a lesson to you, especially in light of current and always coming in the future, the troubles that we perceive are coming as a result of political ramifications that take place in this world. Christ would tell us not to be troubled. Don't be troubled. Don't be troubled by what this president is doing, or what the next president is going to do, or what the last president did, or what some leader of another country is going to do, or what some oligarch is going to do. Christ gives us a stern message. These things must come to pass. They must come to pass. It is needful that they take place. And what he is saying is that this is a part of his design. So in all situations, Christians, like the apostles and what they would have to deal with in light of what Christ is teaching us in Matthew 24, like they were prepared to endure those things that were yet going to be future to them, we must also take a note from this message and understand that these things must also come to pass. But the end is not yet. The end is not yet. Continue to be faithful. Take heed to the word of the Lord and do not be deceived, because many will be deceived. But these things must come to pass. But the end is not yet. Be provoked and be persuaded.